You're listening to the Speaking Tongues podcast. I'm your host, El Charisse. Each week, I sit down to a conversation with multilinguals where we discuss and celebrate language, life, and culture through our own perspectives. Episode 74, Speaking Quechua. Hello, language lovers. Thank you for joining me for this episode of Speaking Tongues, the podcast and conversation with multilinguals. This week, I'm so happy to bring you this conversation with Luz of Quechuata Rimay, where we talked about the Quechua language and culture. In this episode, Luz talks about the way Quechua language was perceived by peers in school in her native Peru. She talked about some of the discrimination that Quechua speakers face that drove some speakers of the language to hide their knowledge of it. We talked about what it was like speaking Spanish coming from her town in the Andes to the capital of Lima, and even the way that Quechua speakers mix the two languages. Luz talks to us about dialects of Quechua that can be found throughout the Andes, and we find out how many speakers there are across Argentina, Bolivia, Colombia, and Ecuador as well. One thing that I loved is talking about the culture among Quechua speakers and the principles and traditions that they uphold, including 3 rules that come from the Inca Empire that are so very important to today. But I have to say, of all the things that Luz talks to us about, my absolute favorite part of this episode is the song that Luz sings for us in Quechua. Thank you to Luz for sharing parts of your language and culture with us. If you enjoyed this episode of Speaking Tongues, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review Speaking Tongues podcast on Apple Podcasts, or like and subscribe on YouTube so that other language lovers like ourselves can find the show. And if you've been a longtime listener of the show or even a recent listener, you can now support us on buymeacoffee.com. Links to all platforms are in the show notes. Okay, let's chat. Welcome back to another episode of Speaking Tongues. I'm here today with Luz. How are you today, Luz?
I'm doing well. Happy to be here with you, Ellie.
So excited to talk to you about Quechua language and culture. And I like to start each episode with the same question, and that is, what is your first language and which languages have you learned to speak?
My first language is Quechua and Spanish because I grew up speaking both languages. So I love more Quechua because Quechua is my grandparents'
Hmm.
tongue. So I consider Quechua as my first language.
Did you only hear Quechua and Spanish spoken in your community when you were growing up?
I heard both.
Okay.
Uh, yeah, Quechua and Spanish. Yes, and Spanish was more common in the school, in the community, and Quechua was more in the rural areas. Especially my grandmother, she spoke only Quechua. That's why I'm fortunate to have learned from her.
That's amazing. When you were in school and you said Spanish was spoken in school, and I assume the language of instruction, what kind of options did you have in school to learn and experience other languages?
It's interesting. In the school, there was a class, I'm sorry, it was an English class, and I tried to learn English in the school, but it was so kind of foreign language for me that I learned the very basic thing. Uh, it was interestingly that we have Quechua in our community, or people spoke Quechua, but it wasn't encouraged in the school. In the contrary, it was a little bit, it was seen as a, uh, if you speak Quechua, you belong to the lower class.
Hmm. So it wasn't encouraged to speak Quechua when you were in school, even among like your friends?
we could speak Quechua among our friends, but it was mostly our friends were laugh at us if we speak Quechua. So for that reason, we kind of didn't want to speak Quechua because I think was because of the history of Quechua. Uh, the discrimination, and if you spoke Quechua and you have this different way of pronouncing the Spanish, and people just like make joke out of it and laugh at you.
So I guess when you were in school, there were people that you went to school with who had no knowledge of Quechua words or anything like that.
I mean, they knew, their parents knew Quechua, but it was this language that but you don't speak.
Oh, wow.
It's interesting. So when I moved from my little town, when I graduated school, I went to Lima. In Lima, I realized that my Spanish wasn't good enough. My Spanish had a different sound, and I spoke a little differently than people in Lima. And there was a time that someone was just laughing at me. You don't say that way. So then I realized, okay, my Spanish is not as well as I thought. So I think many of us who grew up in the Andes trying to learn Spanish uh, have the same issues, that when we migrate to the cities, we realize that we are not still enough. We don't speak well Spanish to be like the other ones.
Oh man. That's so like I don't like that.
uh,
How is it different though? Was it just like the accent, like the way you were speaking Spanish was different than like the city accent in Lima, or was it like using different words in Spanish that I like how was it different?
so we have an expression for that. People in Peru call it mote. You speak mote. That means that your Spanish is broken and has some Quechua words in there. So sometimes maybe I used a lot of diminutive words, because in Quechua we use a lot of diminutive words. And
Mm.
so that's how I was used to speak in the Andes. So I think that was the difference. Sometimes because the vowels are slightly different. If, for example, if I say in Spanish, vámonos, and it will be vámonos, because we use that the U instead of the O. So little sounds like that, and in the city could make a lot of difference.
Oh wow. That's really interesting. I have a lot to learn about I have a lot to learn about languages in Peru. Um, but speaking of Quechua, in preparing for this conversation for this episode, I read that Quechua is not just one language, but several languages. Is that true?
Yes, well, I will say more than several languages. I will say several dialects.
Oh, okay.
In in different region of Peru, we have different dialects of Quechua. So, for example, I'm from Huancavelica, which is in the mountain, like central of Peru. It's kind of south central of Peru, and we speak Quechua Chanca. And there's also Quechua Collao that is spoke mostly in Cusco and other regions of Peru. And then we have like a Quechua Central that's a little central and a little north of Peru. So there are different varieties or dialects of Quechua. Since Quechua was only a spoken language, I think it created that difference of dialects. But I can understand people from Cusco. I can understand people from the north and from other countries too, because Quechua is not only in Peru, it's in Ecuador, it's in Bolivia, in Chile, in Argentina. So Quechua is slightly different, but I can understand them, most of them.
Oh, wow. So the ones that are spoken in outside of Peru, like in Bolivia, Argentina, do those have greater differences than the ones that are spoken that you mentioned that are spoken in Peru?
As far as I heard from Bolivia, is we have a lot of similarities. And I do understand very well people from Argentina, and I cannot highlight like the big differences, just like terms like we have in Spanish. We use different Spanish in Mexico than maybe in Puerto Rico,
Mm,
but we still understand each other. I think we have similarities like that. Um, I think Quechua, Chanca is a little bit more common, and especially in the region I'm from.
okay.
It is interesting. The good thing about it, lately they said that there's about 8 million speakers around the countries. So that's a lot of people that speak Quechua.
That's a ton of people.
So that's including Bolivia, Ecuador, and Argentina and Colombia too.
I
Mm.
would love to know, and I don't expect you to have an answer to this, but I'm thinking 8 million people is a lot. And, um, you know, Quechua is like 700 years old,
Yeah.
older, probably. And I would imagine that there have been times where, I guess, similar to what you said about going to school, where the language was suppressed and it wasn't, not, I don't want to say fashionable, but it wasn't, I guess, popular for people to really speak it widely. So I would be curious to know, like, nowadays, if there's more Quechua speakers than maybe like 50 years ago.
I think probably about the same. The only difference I could say that nowadays people are identifying themselves more as a Quechua speakers than
Right.
before.
Yeah. That's what I
Yeah.
would think too. And probably more people are getting in touch with their history, their heritage, their past, and maybe like making an effort more so than, in the years when maybe it wasn't really encouraged for people to speak Quechua. Like you said, like, their parents speak it, but they don't let people know that they speak it, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. It's because of like the history, how the Spanish kind of prohibited all the Quechua speakers to not speak their language and not to do any, cultural ceremonies. And since then, it kind of Quechua has been hiding.
Mm.
Like my grandmother says, it's been hiding by the mountains. So it's interesting. So the discrimination is pretty high at one point, that parents didn't want their kids to go to the same situation, so they encouraged their kids to learn Spanish.
Mm. Yeah, I can imagine that colonialism, really destroyed some generations of Quechua speakers. Obviously, not everybody, if we have 8 million speakers now in the region, but it's just so sad to hear that, that was the case. And um, in Peru, where Spanish is spoken, um, where in Peru, I guess, like your grandmother says, in the mountains, but where are you likely to hear the language? And I guess where are you likely to see it? Like, do you see it in, I guess, the dialect of, are there words in Quechua that come into like Peruvian Spanish? Are there place names that have Quechua origins, or any customs or rituals or anything in the country, in the society, where you would see influences from Quechua?
Yes, and there's a lot of influences in Peru. Actually, Quechua, it's a big, a wide of the Inca Empire who spoke. But before the Inca, we should keep in mind there was like the pre-Incas culture along the coast in Peru, and when the pre-Incas they united together, and the Inca Empire was it grew big in the south. So nowadays we have the region of Cerro de Pasco, that's Quechua Central, and then we have Junin, that's another dialect, I will say, Quechua Huanca, and then we have the Quechua Chanca that is spoken in my region, Huancavelica, Ayacucho, Apurimac, those places. Then we have the South Quechua and Quechua Collao. That's also Apurimac, because Apurimac is in the kind of in the border, and Cusco, Puno, Arequipa, and Moquegua. So those are the regions that are very south in Peru, and you can hear people speaking Quechua in these regions. And nowadays, and people in the mountain, we still, uh, use some concepts like Aini. Aini is the reciprocity of you kind of the expression to say, I do it for you today and you do it for me tomorrow. It's a working in a group. The way we do Aini is we go to the field if a land needs to be worked, and all the communities and the neighbors goes together and work in the land, and when it's finished and goes to the other person, so that way we help each other, and
Mm,
there's not a money exchange in that case.
I love that idea of no money.
I do too. I really love the idea of Aini. That's something that I would love to keep also on myself as a person. If I learn something, I will share, and I hope the other person could share something that they learned too. So that way, we all learn together. Yeah.
We would have a better world if we could all practice Aini, I
Yes,
think.
I think so. Yeah, and something that actually in the end is that we also have on mind is that we all the time we do any work, and we respect the Pachamama. The Pachamama meaning the Mother Earth. Pachamama is a Quechua word that comes from Pacha, which is a space, place, or time. Mama is like it sounds, mother.
Mm.
So we always respect, and before we do any field work or anything, we kind of ask for the permission and we thank, because we live in this earth and that's where we belong to.
That's really amazing.
Thank you. Yeah, it's something that I really like to practice also in here, and also when I go to my community. uh, it's still very present up in the mountains, especially with my mother, and she's still up there with her animals. And my grandmother, wow, she is about 102 years old, and I love
Really?
telling her. Yes.
God bless. Oh my gosh, that's amazing. I can only imagine the kind of stories that she has.
Oh, yes. And I loved the stories that she used to tell me. And especially, she doesn't, I mean, she's amazing because she does have a lot of knowledge. She having not gone to school, or, she doesn't know how to read or write. And she only speaks Quechua, but she has a very wide advice for you, an advice that will uh, serve you for all your life. And so she's the person who one time told me, don't be afraid of speaking Quechua, because that's who we are.
Mm,
And I love that. And every time I remember that, it gives me more reason, and give me a power to keep speaking Quechua,
of
even
course.
though I'm not in the same place.
But you are bringing it, and you are bringing awareness of your heritage and your language to the world. And I think that that's part of her message too, you know? Well, from my opinion, I think.
Yeah. I think so too. Yes.
Before I ask you about the language, I just, as you're talking about your grandmother and her wisdom, and the things that she's been able to teach, are there any, like, what sort of role do elders in the Quechua community play?
Yes, the elders played a very big role, in my opinion, especially those days, because they are the ones that keep this rich knowledge, as you said, and this rich wisdom. And in the Quechua community, we always respect the mothers and fathers. We call the Hatun Mama, Hatun Taita. And I think what I really like about the elder, they still have this rule of the Inca Empire, that it was very simple. It was just three rules that you know ruled the whole empire, which was Amasua, that means don't be a thief, Amayuya, don't be a liar, and Amaheya, don't be lazy. So every time I think the elderlies think about any situation, they go back to these rules and see uh, if if they are in the going to the right direction.
Mm,
So that's something that I really liked also, that they have the simple rules, but they are very powerful. And also they have a lot of respect, like I said, for the nature. And I think they knew more about the nature than we know now. And the medicine is also a big influence in the Quechua communities. Like my grandfather, he used to know what to do when someone got sick,
mm.
and how he knew. And also my amazing, and I also think that how from who he learned. I think he learned from Pachamama, from the earth, and just wanted to use what we have. Yeah.
I always like to think that you can tell a lot about a community, you can tell a lot about a people, a society, based on the way that they revere their elders. And it sounds to me like, well, from all the values that you mentioned, that this is a community of people that have values when a lot of places around the world are valueless, it seems. But it's, I like to hear that, because I feel like in the United States, for example, like, the way we treat our elders can be horrible sometimes. and the way that we don't respect them and we don't care for them and listen to them and take into consideration that they have years of knowledge and years of experience that we can all learn from. So when I hear in another society, in another country, another part of the world that they take care of their elders and they honor them, I think that's really important. And it says a lot about the community there in the mountains, I think.
Yeah, and you're right. The way we think about our elderly here in America, it's slightly different. That's something that also made me think how we're approaching. Uh, in Peru, it's slightly different. It's more like a family um, togetherness and stay together and respect the elder, and also get the knowledge from them. I think that's how we survive during these years.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, wow, I'm ready to come to Peru.
Yes, you
And
should.
I think
I'll be happy to share you around.
I'm ready to come and visit. And like I've always wanted to see the Andes mountains. And I know that pictures online don't do it justice, but it just looks so beautiful and I'm ready. Like whenever this situation passes.
Yes, I hope you have that opportunity soon.
I want to know about the language of Quechua.
Mhm.
What are some of the things that I guess someone learning the language or maybe someone listening to it, what are some of the hallmarks of the language? Is it tonal? How do you form sentences? Are there particular greetings for certain people in the community? Um, Tell me what you can about the language itself and how it works.
Yes, to understand better the language, and probably I mentioned before, and I said that it was only oral language. So it's a little challenging, and that's why we have all different dialects in different parts. So, but the good thing is that we are building up an alphabet and borrowing some words from words or especially alphabet letters from English to be able to write and preserve the language.
Mhm.
So most of the time, the sounds probably will be slightly different in different regions, different depending on the dialect. But I think as long as you learn one of the dialect, you will be okay. So normally the language is very agglutinative.
Okay.
So meaning that you have the root of the word, then you can keep adding a suffix that it will have a sentence. Um, for example, if I say the word rimay, rimay means speak. It's uh, it's a verb. Then we can say rimani. We add the ni. Then I am saying I speak. Then we can say the same sentences in the past. We can say rimarhani. I said in the past, I spoke. So you can add some suffix in the future and in the past or in the present and use the same root word.
Mm.
So if we use, for example, an object, maybe we can use it a house. Uh, and a house in Quechua is wasi. Then wasi is just house. Then we can add wasicha, that means a little house. Then we can add another suffix. We can say wasichaiki, that's your house, then we can start building up from the root of that word wasi to a very long word that it could be wasi chaiki kuna pacha. So that's maybe for your little house. That's a little sentence. That's the whole sentence. So from one little uh, word, you can build a long word and a sentence. So that's how Quechua works. The good thing is about when you know one word, you already can play with it and can learn the language easily.
Hmm. I love this.
And the good thing about that, talking about like reading Quechua, I'm still learning how to write in Quechua, even though I spoke some like I spoke some Quechua in when I was in the mountain, but I didn't know how to write. So I'm learning how to write. Hopefully, that way I could spread more Quechua in a writing way. So I'll be happy to do that.
When did people start focusing on in introducing written Quechua?
Well, it started from there was a writer, Jose Maria Arguedas. He was an anthropologist, and he was one of the first indigenous author. His name Jose Maria Arguedas.
Mm.
If you want to look it up, and he has some books, and I have seen that there's some books available also online in English. So he talks about, he writes in Quechua, borrowing the Spanish alphabets. So, so he was the first person who kind of put the life of Quechuans in a book
Mm.
and explain how, how was the life in the Andes, how was the indigenous people treated when he was young. It was interesting that his story is that he doesn't look indigenous. Well, he has kind of a little look of indigenous, but he belonged to this family that has some land. But unfortunately, his mother passed away. So he left. He lived in the Andes with the indigenous community, and he could experience this both world of how people are treated in the fields, in the campus, and how people is treated in the monarchy. So he writes of all his experience in his book. One of his book, my favorite book, is Todas las Sangres. That means all bloods. So it speaks about his experience in the Andes.
Interesting. I want to read that.
Yeah, it's interesting, and you can, I think, find in Amazon.
Is it only in Spanish?
I found it in English, so I
Okay.
think other books also are translated in English. I'm
Okay.
not sure, but all the plots are.
Okay. I
And yeah, Yawar Fiesta, it's another, well, that's a Quechua word, Yawar, Fiesta. And as soon as you look for Jose Maria Argueda's books, then you can probably find a list of his books.
okay. I will take care of that because I this sounds really interesting to me. There are languages there are languages that are related to Quechua, right? Um I'm blanking on the word. It begins with an A.
Aymara.
Aymara.
You got it. You almost got it.
I was close. So with I
Yeah.
with languages like Aymara that are related. Well, I don't know how related Aymara is, but I guess indigenous languages spoken in the same region. Do you know, are there any similarities or any um any similarities between the two?
Mhm. Uh, I I'm not very familiar with Aymara, but it's an indigenous language in Peru and it's widely spoken. I wish I could know more to have like that big differences. Uh, I have heard people speaking Aymara. I do understand a little, especially the numbers. Maybe it's one of the common, but I don't know if it's how many numbers in Aymara could be similar to Quechua. But some words are similar because somehow, indigenous community, like any other languages, I think we can borrow words from other languages as well.
Okay.
And I also wanted to mention about borrowing Quechua I'm sorry, like words from languages. It's interesting that we have in the United States some words that we use and we don't probably kind of know that it comes from Quechua. And it was interesting to find out when I came to the United States. So one of these words is charqui or chargi. Then the word llama, it's
Mhm.
very wide used, and quinoa, the food, the grain,
Yeah.
and then we have condor, also it's a Quechua word. And,
Really?
yeah, and we have other words as well, like wano, I think we use as well in English. So it's interesting how the Quechua language is used in English and in Spanish too, because we also use it in Spanish.
Yeah. Like, you know what really always surprises me? Quinoa. And I always think of it, and I had quinoa for dinner last night. and and I love it. And it's the thing that I always wanted to know, and I don't want you to be the spokesperson, but just if you have any thoughts or if you've ever like if you know anything about it. I'd always wonder like how do people from places where quinoa is grown, like in Peru, how often do people there eat quinoa? And what do they think about the way that quinoa is portrayed in America as this like health food and, this, especially with everyone going plant based and being vegan, it seems like quinoa is just so hot. Like everyone has quinoa at some point, it's in everything. Like, I wonder how people, and for the past couple of years, like I've wondered you know, how people in Peru and other parts of South America feel about that.
It's an interesting question. So it's interesting because growing up in the Andes, my grandfather used to farm quinoa.
Hmm.
And quinoa, we treated, especially my grandmother, like a grain of a basic uh, grain, but a powerful grain. And she called uh, mama quinoa. That
Hmm.
means, mother quinoa, because it's the food that gives us all the nutrition.
Mhm.
And my grandma used to say, we shouldn't spread it anywhere, because it's one of the grain we kind of uh, appreciate a lot. So then, little by little, when my grandfather couldn't farm anymore, so quinoa also was not farmed in the mountain. Uh, but when I came to the United States, I saw quinoa accessible and a good price everywhere. So
Mhm.
as a Peruvian, I was like, "Oh, great! I'm going to eat quinoa every day." But at the same time, like you said, Like, how many people in Peru are not eating quinoa and exporting quinoa?
Mm,
Uh, so I cannot speak for the whole country, but for my little region, quinoa is not a common food anymore. It has a kind of people are not farming. I think it's because more people are migrating to the
mm,
cities. But if you go to the markets in Peru, quinoa is very expensive to afford, and that gave me a thought of like why it's so expensive for our own people.
right.
Yeah.
Right. I do think of that, and it's a completely different conversation. Um but it's really sad that I don't know. I mean, I can I have a lot of thoughts about this, and I just feel like I don't want to I don't want to get off topic, but I do think that it's unfortunate is the word I was going to use, but it's beyond unfortunate because it's something that belongs to the people of the Andes, and to not have accessibility to it as consumers is
Yeah, I think most is why the accessibility, especially the price down there, it's higher. I mean, it's great that we have here in the United States, and also I think it's probably part of the strategy of the economy in Peru that needs to be regulated or somehow.
yeah, I agree. um So, because Quechua is a language that is mostly oral, I would imagine that, or I would say has been, because it's starting to, people are writing the language now.
Mhm.
I would imagine that there's a very rich oral tradition, and maybe even tradition musically, of songs and maybe poetry and spoken legend. Is that the case?
Yes, it's interesting that Quechua, it's a lot of that storytelling, music, singing.
Mm,
So it's a lot. It has an like also dance. You know how you uh, live the language. And I think my grandmother, she wasn't a singer, she wasn't like performer, but naturally of her culture, that's something that uh, we used to do. And I love how she maintained her language. And most of the time in the mountains, the songs are dedicated of the daily life, and to the animals, to the Pachamama.
mm,
And we have songs for everything, starting from uh, like grazing the sheep, and also harvesting and working in a group. And there is a song, I think that was a way to be together, and also at the same time work together singing.
mm.
And it's so interesting. And I do like to practice or keep my Quechua singing, some songs that I do remember from my grandmother. Sometimes I do listen online, which a lot of music has been available online these days.
Yeah.
So that's something that I like to keep alive. But yes, music, storytelling, singing is a part of the big the culture, the Quechua culture, and how to keep the culture alive and how to keep the language alive.
As far as storytelling goes, are there or is there a story that maybe every Quechua speaker knows? Like maybe like a part of like an epic story, or like a legend, or maybe even a song. like an old song that like everybody knows the words to, or everyone knows some version of it.
Wow, yeah, there are several like expression and words that everyone's knows in Peru. For example, just a word that is very common. It's yapa chaikuay. That means, could you give me a second, or could you give me a little bit more? So it's a yapita. It's a in Spanish. It's very well used in Peru, and stories. It depends on the region. Most of the time, it's said that the Inca Empire was built when Mama Okio and appear from the lake. So and yeah, it's interesting story, but I cannot speak for all the regions.
Hmm.
So yeah, there's several words used until now.
Okay.
In Peru, I think it's a lot of mixed. Sometimes even the speakers doesn't know that it's a Quechua word.
How are Quechua speakers able to retain and use their language and continue to pass on their language to the next generation in Peru, where Spanish is used in official capacity?
Yes, that's a little challenging. Is if especially Spanish is everywhere. So that's what happened in my little town. That only my grandmother. It was the only person that I could speak Quechua to, and the rest was mostly in Spanish. They could understand me in Quechua, but the answer was in Spanish. So the same thing happens, I think, in a lot of communities in Peru. I think most of the parents now or young generation are getting conscious of the language, and they're trying to learn, and parents are trying their best to their kids to learn Quechua. But it was a moment that Quechua population was decaying when there was when the discrimination was very prominent in Peru.
Hmm.
So, but these days is it's amazing that I have experienced the little kids are asking how to say this in Quechua, and what do you mean with this? And I saw this in somewhere. Could you tell me what does it mean? So there's a lot of interest in the young community those days to learn Quechua, and I think that's a good start.
Mm.
And something that the school system, especially I think the government hasn't pushed, is to maybe have uh, the Quechua language as a course, as a part of the curriculum. And I think it's something that all Peruvians will really appreciate, and have that opportunity to learn, Quechua, your original language.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you, if you know that, or if you know if kids are learning the language in school or learning some portion of the language in schools.
There are some part of Peru that are teaching in Quechua, or Quechua is available, but in my region in Huancavelica, there's not that option yet. So I hope in the future we have that option and that opportunity for the kids to choose to learn Quechua. And I think having that a option in the curriculum will make a lot of difference. I know they encourage. I mean, they don't encourage, but there is English and French and other languages. But I think Quechua should be valued the same.
I agree. I definitely agree with that. I think that would be so powerful. In what ways does Quechua reflect the culture and the differences among people in Peru?
So Quechuans usually also identified by the clothing. It's one of the big differences, especially the regions in Cusco, Apurimac, and as you can see in my picture, but uh, uh, you have your jikya, something that you wear around, and it's like a little blanket that is handmade. And most of the women wear this in the Andes, and I think that's something that makes a difference between people in the coast and in the Andes. But ultimately, like especially lately, a lot of people who have migrated from the Andes live in the big cities in the coast, and they are identifying themselves as a Quechua speakers, as the Andeans. So it's
Mm,
kind of getting inclusion. I see a little inclusion a little bit more, and they are trying to speak up and saying that we are Quechua speakers, we are cholos, like we call ourselves.
mhm.
But that doesn't mean because I belong to the Andes and because I wear this clothes, I should be discriminated.
Mm. I like that. And you mentioned your picture, so I just want to describe that you're wearing a hat from what I can see in the photo.
Yes.
And what is the name of the what is the name of the hat that you're wearing?
We have the hat. It's called sombrero macora. So it's very typical from my little town is Santiago Chocorvos, and I am way up in the mountain. It's called San Miguel de Curis. So we usually wear that sombrero, and then I have my yikia. It's a blanket that we fold, and we carry things in the middle. What I like about the yikia, and we all use pretty much yikia in the Andes, that you can put anything in there. Uh, you can carry as a backpack, and if you get cold, you use that blanket to cover your shoulders and your back. And also mothers use this yikia to carry their babies. So I grew up in my mom's back, carried by a yikia.
I love that. Who makes them? They're handmade? I'm gonna assume that they're handmade. Are they?
Yes. So to tell a little bit about that story, my grandmother has sheep, and she had, I'll say sheep, um, then llamas and alpacas. So she was very a woman that really liked to make things, and she spin the wool, and we have to shear it and wash it and spin the wool. And one of my favorite activity to help her was to spin the wool. And so I remember with my cousin saying like, "Oh, let's go where grandma is. I'm gonna spin the the wool." So that was my favorite activity when I was growing up. But the jikia is made out of sheep wool, and the colors are normally dye with plants that you can find around,
Mm-hmm.
and that's handmade in a loom. And the colorful ones, you have different other natural colors that you can dye. And I do have a very big memories of dyeing the wool and spinning the wool, and also getting ready for the yikia to be made. That was a very long work. Uh,
Yeah.
yes, but I love the how the yigya is made. I think that's something that our ancestors have give us a knowledge how to, uh, you know, make those yikyas in a loom and make all the designs. You cannot see very well in the picture, but it has some designs and also kind of like animals that you can see in there too.
Are they ever made for special occasions or are they generally for all purpose?
Generally, in my town, for all purposes.
Okay.
But there are certain pieces in other regions that are made for special occasions.
I'm going to look these up because as you're describing it, it sounds beautiful. And I bet that they are beautiful and very
Yeah,
warm.
I do have some in my closet. So sometimes I just get my jigya and just walk around.
Oh. For people who are listening and for people who don't have any connection to Quechua and the community or Peru, how can people support the language and support the people who speak the language in order to help continue its preservation, spoken and written?
Yes, I think creating spaces like this, and thank you for this opportunity to open this space, uh, so people can know about Quechua. I think it's great to create spaces in social media to kind of give awareness, because I think most indigenous speakers are afraid to speak their language because they are not empowered. I think it's good to be empowered and to be heard, and to be able to understand about their culture as well. Because I think we all, accepting the diversity, uh, we can make a better world. And I think it's good as well to normalize, as someone said the other day in a meeting, normalize that multilingualism, because it's the way that you can communicate to others about other languages, about other people's knowledge. And I think speaking like indigenous language like Quechua shouldn't make you uh, any less as a person.
Yeah.
Creating that opportunity to be listened, uh, opportunity to spread the knowledge. I think it's the best way to support. And I have seen a lot of in Peru programs that are starting open up to the public, especially like TB, where people can, or little kids can learn Quechua. I think that's a great opportunity. And universities are accepting in Peru, are accepting some dissertations in Quechua. That's a big achievement.
Yeah.
And I think little by little we are being integrated. And especially this year, we have a big, I don't know if I call celebration, but I'll say a big time to think about, because we are celebrating the 200 years of independence this month in Peru.
Yeah.
So I think it's a time that we can think about, like, what we have gone through and what we are doing and what we still need to do.
Mhm.
And I think keeping in mind that we all diverse, especially in Peru, we have 48 indigenous languages, and Quechua is one of the most spoken languages. And like you mentioned, there's Aymara and there's Chipibo, and those languages also should be heard.
Mm.
Yeah,
I
I think.
agree. And I also hope that after 200 years, it's a chance to reflect on where Peru is going and how to bring the past into the future.
Exactly. Yeah. I think we have, for so many years, kind of forgotten about our roots and kind of just focus what was maybe uh, the future of other languages, but our language. So I think now it's kind of grab what we really are and just move forward, being more included in the community.
Hmm. Is there anything else that you want to talk about that I didn't think to ask you?
I want to share this little song. Uh, it's from the singer. She's a Bolivian singer, Luzmila Carpio. She's also Aymara speaker,
Hmm.
and she has written a lot of beautiful songs in Quechua, and I really like this song, so I'm gonna share and translate it as well.
Okay.
Warang hawata pasaju, ama chingka chunchu. Warang hawatas pasaju, ama chingka chunchu. Quechua parlay ninchi, shuya yaka kuchu. Quechua parlay ninchi, shuya yaka kuchu. So that's a little piece of the song that means even though uh, thousands of years has passed by, our Quechua language should be clear and alive.
Thank
So
you so much for singing. And I was going to ask you earlier if you wanted to sing a song, but I didn't want I didn't know. I didn't want to make you feel like you had to, but I'm so I'm really truly honored that you sang this song for this episode, and no one's ever sang a song before. So I'm double honored.
oh, thank you for giving me this space and talking about Quechua. It's a language that I love. It's a language of my grandfathers and my fathers, so my grandparents.
Yeah.
I want to keep alive the language and the wisdom as well.
Luz, thank you so much for having this conversation. And before I forget, I want you to tell everyone where we can find you on social media.
Sure, I have a page that I share some of pictures from the Andes when I'm there, and that page is Quechuata Rimay. That's like the word Quechua. Then you add TA, so that's Quechuata Rimay. So that's the word speak. So that means speak Quechua. You can find me in Instagram and Facebook and also in Clubhouse. We'll be talking about some Quechua words and maybe singing as well in Clubhouse. So
Well, if you're going to be singing on Clubhouse, I will be there.
yes, please come and join us. And yes, I will be sharing a little bit more of Quechua. And as I said, I would love to learn more and share as well.
Thank you so much. I will add your links to your social media in the show notes for this episode so that anyone listening will be able to click and just find you right away.
Thank you so much, Ellie. So I'm going to say hasta luego, or that means tupanan chicama. And Quechua, we don't have a word that it says goodbye. So we have a word uh, tupanan chicama. That means until next time.
Before we say Tupanachikama, I have
Mhm.
one more question for you.
Yes, yes, go ahead.
Do you have any jokes, tongue twisters, cool slang words
Oh God.
idioms, words of wisdom, or words of advice in Quechua to share.
Wow, I kind of went blank. But I will say um, the expression that my grandma used to say, Quechua Rimay ninchikta, anchata, kaipachison, wichayman puririchison. That means our Quechua language always will be how to literally translate, like forward will uh, spread our Quechua language without being afraid.
Okay.
Yes.
Can you teach it to me?
Runa siminchikta,
Runesiminchita,
wichayman,
Wichaiman,
apasum.
Apasun.
Great.
My first Quechua saying.
Yay!
Thank you so much. No, I love to do that because I want people to try. Every every time I want people to hear, the answer to this question, and I like to try. I think there's never any harm in trying, and Quechua is a fun language to say. The pronunciations are I like how it sounds.
Yes, and the sounds is it's I like the sound. It's like a singing kind of. And
Yeah.
I also wanted to add, like saying, like to be able to speak Quechua, I think has helped me to learn English as well, because some sounds we might not have in Spanish, but our tongue are maybe used to where make the sounds, so it makes it a little easier to learn other languages.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. I'm looking forward to learning more Quechua from you. I will be following you on social media. And I usually ask like how to say goodbye, but you already taught me to tupanachikama.
Great, tupanakama.
I love that word. I have to try to get it into my vocabulary.
Yes.
Thank you so much again for this conversation, Luz. I will be talking to you soon.
Sounds great. Thank you so much.
Thank
Tupanakama.
you. Tupanachikama. Bye.
Bye.